Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session, How to Scale Business Architecture with Growth. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Tali from WSI Digital Path. We are digital marketing agency and we help businesses leverage power of internet to build their online presence and scale. Today, I have the pleasure having my guest here, Sam Gupta. And Sam has been an ERP thought leader in the digital transformation space for nearly 20 years. His primary focus is on financial systems and ERP. And he has been a part of the Fortune 500 corporations, but now he spends his time consulting with small to medium sized businesses. Sam regularly speaks at industry conferences and contributes his experiences through many popular blogs and publications. He also hosts a podcast called WSI Rocks, focused on businesses growth through digital transformation and ERP, where he interviews top influencers in the space of obviously from ERP, digital transformation, supply chain, and accounting. Welcome, Sam, and thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Ali, for having me. I'm super excited to be here and super excited to talk to your fun listeners.
Okay, perfect. So, how about we start with tell us a little bit about your business, what you do, so we have some, in understanding. I tried my best to introduce you, but I'm sure it's not 100%, accurate. Yeah.
No, you did actually an amazing job, but I am going to build on top of that. So, a little bit about what we do. We are in the ERP and digital transformation business. So the majority of the time we are going to be doing a lot of selection engagement. So let's say if customers need our help in finding the right system, the right enterprise or business architecture that they might be seeking to accomplish their business goals, they work with us. If they simply need to optimize or integrate their existing systems or the infrastructure just because they might have bought it, but they might not be getting business value out of these systems, they hire us again. And then sometimes there might be just the rip and replace where they are trying to replace the systems. We help with the implementation and training. And if people are not familiar with what an ERP system is, these are going to be the integrated systems. So typically when the organization grows after a certain point, they are going to require that their accounting system is going to be connected with your operation system. Operations need to be connected with your sales system. The more you grow, the more connected you need to be overall with respect to your system and processes. So that's who we typically help, Ali.
Yeah, so you know what? It's actually interesting question. You touched this point. There's so many systems around and abbreviations: ERP, CRM, automation, platforms. So can you just give us idea? People might not know what does it mean ERP, what does it mean CRM, automation, what does it mean, and how it's valuable to a business, right?
Yeah, so let's take example of different industries because these things differ based on a specific industry. For example, let's say if you talk about any of the company that is legally incorporated, whether it is going to be a startup or it's going to be Fortune 500 company, right? They all need some sort of underlying accounting system. And the base of the ERP system is always going to be that accounting system because they are going to require financial statement. That is going to be your balance sheet. It's going to be your cash flow statement. It's going to be your income statement, right? So everybody needs some sort of accounting system. Now, when you grow, you require all of those systems to be connected. So that's where your ERP comes in. And if you don't know what ERP stands for, that is the enterprise resource planning. Now, companies also need a CRM system, for example, right? That is going to be a specialized system to be able to manage your sales or marketing side of processes. Now, let's say if you have some sort of e-commerce space, you could be a product company, you could be selling, let's say, the financial products or insurance products, or if you're doing any sort of transactions on your digitally, then you probably would require some sort of e-commerce front as well. So depending upon the industry type. So let's take some examples of these industry types, right? So let's say if you talk about your manufacturing centric industries, manufacturing, distribution, retail, they all are going to require some sort of ERP system, because they need to get their costing right. The more assets you have in the organization, the more sophisticated system you are going to need to be able to track all of these costs. Now everybody has some sort of customers, right? So they would require an the CRM system. Now the CRM system is going to be slightly more specialized towards the sales and marketing process. Now if you move to some of the professional services companies, for example, let's say if you talk about some of the insurance brokers, or you talk about law services firms, they might have a very specialized system for their operations, because it's going to be very specific to their processes. Law firms, the way they operate, the way their business processes are, they are not going to be similar to, let's say, a manufacturing company or the construction company or the insurance company or the bank. So for the operations, they might have a very specific operational system, but the back end of that is always going to be some sort of financial or accounting system. And typically accounting and financial processes are going to be similar across the industries, across the organization. So they might be using just the financial piece of the ERP, but they might have a different operational system, and then they might have, let's say, a CRM system to be able to deal with the customer side of process from the sales and marketing perspective. I don't know if that gives you a little bit of perspective in terms of how these systems align. I can talk about the scope of each of these systems as well, as we move forward in the show.
Right. So I think that we probably, for people to better understand, this might be a little bit too complex, I would
Okay.
say, to understand if some businesses don't really have implementation and integration between systems. And I actually have been working with quite a number of clients that all the systems, they just independent and they
Yeah.
not integrated into each other, CRM, automation, ERP, that they basically standalone systems, right? So from your experience, why it is important to have those systems set up properly and integrated before scaling, actually, right? And if you can bring it on example of actual industry, you mentioned insurance brokers, right?
Yeah.
Brokerages. So if you can give us example on certain industry and the importance, it would be great.
Yeah, so a couple of points that you mentioned related to the implementation. If the systems are not really implemented or if they are not connected, when you are a small company, you are going to be fairly isolated overall from your departmental, collaboration perspective. When you look at your process in the cross-functional manner, for example, let's say if you have an organization where you have 5, 6 people, each of the department, let's say accounting is going to be fairly independent, your operations is going to be fairly independent, your sales is going to be fairly independent. So you don't have the sales talking to, let's say, the finance. But as you grow in your scale, as you add more people to your organization, as you add more transaction, there's going to be a need for the cross-functional collaboration. And the more you are gonna grow, that's when the connectivity is going to be really important. Now the other point about implementation, let's say if you buy a system, but if you don't implement it right, then what is going to happen is your employees are not going to use it. So what will happen is, even though you have a system, but they will still be managing their processes either in the spreadsheet or they will be performing manually. So you might have a software system. The goal of software system is to automate the processes, decouple your decision making so that your systems can make the decisions. So that, let's say, if some of your key employees are going to be off or whatever, so that those rules are really incorporated inside the system, so that you don't have to wait for these people, let's say, to approve your sales order, or to approve your pricing, or to approve your discounting, or to just release an invoice to the customer. So the more automated processes you have, the more they are incorporated in the system, the more streamlined the processes are going to be in your organization. And if you don't implement it right, if people don't use the systems, obviously the processes are going to be they are still going to be very manual, and that is going to become bottleneck to your growth, because every time you need something, you need to talk to somebody. When you have to talk to somebody, you have to rely on that person. Now, what are the odds that you can find that person with the similar capabilities in the market? It's going to be really hard to replicate that. So the more you decouple the decision making and more you put it in the system, the easier it is going to be for you to be able to scale.
Right. So it's interesting you mentioned this. I actually just spoke to a client a couple of weeks ago. They
Yeah,
purchased CRM system, and they have been paying for the system for a year, I think
yeah.
almost a year, but they don't really use it because some departments, they're not sure how to use it, and if they're not ready. So there is actually a lot of obstacles. Companies, even the companies that they purchase systems, either some of the employees, they're not sure how to use it, they want to make sure to do proper training. So there is a lot of things to consider.
It-
So from your experience again, how many businesses are missing a proper setup of their systems, right? And I know that you work with small to medium sized businesses. So if we were to give example of percentage, how many of them actually missing the proper setup?
I would say it's going to be 90%, and that's not even overstated. And the reason for that is because the commitment has to come, let's say, from the leadership. The alignment, the value realization of the system has to come from the leadership. They really have to create the organizational structure. Your technology cannot solve the problem overnight. You really need to create some sort of incentives or the motivations in your organization in a way that people are really going to use the system. For example, let's take an example, the one that you had mentioned. So I'll tell you a story. We worked with one of the organization. They are in the distribution space, and they have at least 15 different software or maybe more. Okay, and they are paying a lot of money in the licensing. But if you look at the overall utilization of the software inside the organization, typically software is really going to be used by their IT department. If their sales needs anything, they are actually going to be talking to their IT to be able to get the data or the insight they really need. Now, if you were using the system, ideally, that company, everybody should be on the system. They should be mapping their business processes. For example, let's say if I'm talking to a customer right now, if they are talking to their customer, they should be booking the sales order. They should be capturing that interaction the way you described in your CRM example, right? They should be using the system. But in their case, they don't necessarily use the system. So what they are going to do is they are still going to use the paper and the spreadsheet to be able to make their notes, and then they are going to send to their IT so that IT can actually enter that. Now, if you are going to do that, obviously, number one, you are paying unnecessary money. You are better off just not buying that system. It's just unused, right? And then when you have this patchy architecture, that creates a lot bigger problem than doing it, just on manual organizations could be amazing, to be honest. Okay, if they are completely manual, they don't worry about the software but obviously when you scale, you need some sort of system. So yeah, so I would say 90% is the utilization rate of the software. A lot of times it's just going to be used by the IT. Other departments are simply going to rely on their IT to be able to provide the information, to be able to incorporate the business process, to be able to plan, when they need anything for their business processes.
Right. So I always suggest whenever we speak about any kind of system, business logic, flows, integrations, and everything else, first analyze your backyard, right? Basically understand what your needs
Yeah.
instead of, buying expensive systems and then they sitting at your, back pocket and nobody using them, right? I also saw, let's say, companies getting leads, for example, from online sources,
Yeah.
website, or anything else, and then the CRM, the actual CRM, right? It's not set up properly, or again, we speak about a manual process. And then if this person that responsible for CRM manual process on vacation or sick or quit or was fired, and then the business suddenly the sales department, they don't get any leads, right? Or maybe they get leads, but they not being basically forwarded to them. So it's just create overall mess. So I think you're right. So if a business decide that not to go with any integration and automation, then do it this way. If you already implement some systems, then implement it properly. Otherwise, when it's half, it just falls between the chairs, right? So in that on that note, speaking about systems, could you suggest any ERP, CRM, automation platforms that you find work the best for small, medium-sized businesses? And maybe it depends on the industry, but if you can give people some tips, what kind of system works the best from few points.
Yeah, so I think you are asking the $1 million question here, and I don't think
Always,
I am.
always.
I'm going to have answer for that. Okay, so typically when you talk about a system being best, and you talk about, give me a top 10 system, for my company, for my industry. Typically, when you look at the top 10 list, it's going to have a lot of different variables that are going to matter in case of your software selection. So you typically, what may be number one, let's say for the real estate industry, may not be number one for the manufacturing industry. What may be number one for the manufacturing industry, large manufacturing industry, may not be as good for the small law firm. So again, the number one criteria that you need to be looking at is going to be whether the system really incorporates or the design philosophy. You need to understand the design philosophy, which is one level deeper, not just looking at features and functions. Because, when you design a system, when you design a house, you design for a specific purpose. That system works similarly. Okay, it follows a specific design philosophy. The way the data elements are going to interact with each other, the way screens are going to be designed, they are going to be designed for a specific audience in mind. Okay, and each of the system that you are going to see in the market, they serve a very specific audience. The audience varies based on the size. It varies based on the industry. It varies based on the usage, how you are going to be using the system. It varies based on the geography, depending upon where you are going to be. Just because a system that is designed for, let's say, Mexico may not be appropriate for the US, because the language matters, the way your screens or functions or the functionality is named inside the software. If you don't really personalize that for the users that are going to be using it, they will not be able to connect with it. So I would say, in terms of criteria, the number one always is going to be size, is the most important factor. Okay, the size of the software and size of the industry that the software is targeting. Number two is going to be the industry focus. Number three is going to be your specific business requirement, your specific business needs that you have for your business, and how they are different from your industry. Sometimes you are going to think that, you are completely different. But then you need to simplify your process to be able to align with your industry. You are not always going to be different. Sometimes you are going to be different just because you have over-engineered your process. So you need to first simplify that, right? So yeah, so I don't know, if those 3 or 4 criteria are good enough for you, but those are typically the most important in terms of finding the software. But you need to go line by line when it comes to software. It's never, okay, hey, tell me one software that is really going to be good for me. It doesn't work that way. You really need to go line by line and figure out if a software or the solution, when you look at the interaction of all of these solutions. For example, let's say if your enterprise architecture includes your CRM plus e-commerce plus ERP, so you need to figure out whether they are integrated or not, and they are integrated in the way your business processes are set up. And if you don't really meet the needs of your business, then obviously the solution is not going to work. So even if your ERP system may be designed for your industry, but let's say if the CRM system is not designed, or the integration piece that is actually tying these two systems together is not your design for your industry, then again, that's not going to be fit for you.
So my next question, actually, I know that you work with many manufacturing clients, but I know that you work with other industries as well. So what do you find when you have similar industries? Usually, do they use similar platforms and systems, or you see it might, again, based on your previous kind of comment, that each business should understand their business goals and needs? Or you see that across industry, most likely 90% would use the same systems?
So typically, if you look at the micro industries, not the industry, because industry sometimes could be bigger. When you look at manufacturing, manufacturing could be all over the place. Some of the manufacturing organizations are really going to be sort of the service organization because they do a lot of project work, right? So it really goes back to your business model, how you are interacting with your customer, what your order size is, how your order is structured, how your invoice is structured, how you are serving your customer. So I would say when you look at different industries, micro industries typically are going to have the similar needs. For example, let's say if you talk about some of the manufacturers that are doing the commoditized manufacturing, which is going to be, let's say you are building the coffee mugs, or maybe some of the parts for your laptops, or maybe parts for let's say the airplane. Again, when you talk about the aerospace industry, aerospace may have its own compliance equality requirement, but the manufacturing process is going to be similar. Now let's talk about some of the service industry. For example, let's say if you look at the law firm is going to have its own legal processes, the way they serve their customer. But if you look at the commonality between your accounting organization, marketing organization, software development organization, or the legal organization, they are going to have similar structure in the way their customers are structured, the way they transact with the customer, the way they bill their customers, the way they pay their vendors, right? So there are going to be some similarities, but there are going to be your industry specific requirements that is going to be more from the compliance perspective. That is going to be there are going to be some differences, but for the most part, if you look at the micro industry, you can't look at the industry as a whole, because each micro industry has its own nuances, but typically inside the industry they tend to have similar needs.
Yeah. Okay. So, just to summarize, and to round up this great conversation, what advice would you give to the businesses that looking to grow and scale? What do they need to do right now? I mean, now, tomorrow, yesterday. So, what steps they should take? What is your, $1 million advice?
So my $1 million advice is going to be in the implementations that we have seen fail and businesses losing millions of dollars. So I am actually going to give advice from that perspective. The majority of the time, the reason why these implementations fail is because you didn't perform the exercise of simplifying the business. You need to first simplify the business. Think from the industry perspective how your industry works. Okay, if you are too different from your industry, most likely you are doing something very creative that is not necessarily required from the process perspective.
Well, you
Okay.
could be very, very sorry, very much behind the industry as well, right? If
Uh,
only.
that's that's a possibility. That's definitely a possibility. But for the most part, if you are part of the industry, your business processes are likely to be similar. So just make sure that you study your industry and figure out why you are different. Question that, simplify that before you try to install anything. Simplifying will help you a lot, because the most of the time when you look at these failed implementation, what they are trying to do is they are trying to create the features and functionality on top of the standard software that already studied at least 1,000 businesses in your industry. Okay, it would have been installed a business similar to you, which might be far bigger, but you are going to think that my business is different. Okay, so you
Okay.
are not different. Just
Okay.
simplify it, streamline it before you implement any technology or try to automate that.
Sounds good. So, I think that we don't have any more questions here. I would like to thank you, Sam, so much for the discussion. It was great chatting with you. And thank you, everyone who joined us for this live chat. I hope you got some insights and tips. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach to Sam. He is always ready to help and answer. Or if you have any questions for me, feel free to reach to me as well. So thanks again for joining us this afternoon. Thank you, Sam, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Tali, for having me. It was so much fun.
Bye. Bye.